I'm going to reminisce with you and tell you things that you didn't know that happened in the 7 years that we shot over 150 Dukes of Hazzard episodes.
What if I told you that one of the most beloved stars from the Dukes of Hazzard made a promise to never work with one of his co-stars ever again? And what if I told you that this decision was so final and so personal that it changed everything behind the scenes of America's favorite Southern comedy? Today, we're diving deep into the untold story of James Best, the man who brought Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane to life, and the shocking reason why he drew a line that he would never cross again. For millions of fans around the world, James Best was the heart and soul of the Dukes of Hazzard. Every Friday night, families gathered around their television sets to watch Sheriff Roscoe chase Bo and Luke Duke through the dusty roads of Hazzard County. With his silly laugh, his bumbling patrol car crashes, and his famous catchphrases, Roscoe made us all smile week after week. He was a lovable lawman who could never quite catch those Duke boys, no matter how hard he tried. But behind that goofy sheriff's badge was a man with decades of serious acting experience. James Best wasn't just some comedian who stumbled into television. He was a trained professional who had worked with some of Hollywood's biggest stars. Before he ever put on that sheriff's uniform, Best had already appeared in over 600 television shows and dozens of movies. He had trained under the legendary acting teacher Lee Strasberg, the same man who taught Marlon Brando and James Dean. Best had worked alongside Jimmy Stewart in the classic Western Winchester 73, and he held his own with Paul Newman in The Left-Handed Gun. James Best was also a respected acting teacher who mentored future stars like Quentin Tarantino and Gary Busey. This was a man who took his craft lightly. When he joined the Dukes of Hazzard, he brought all of that experience and professionalism with him. He didn't see Roscoe as just a silly sheriff. He saw him as a character that kids could laugh at but also love. That perfect mix of comedy and heart didn't happen by accident. Best rewrote dialogue, came up with funny physical gags, and constantly pushed the writers to give him better material. Most of the cast and crew respected James' Best's passion and dedication. Catherine Bach, who played the beautiful Daisy Duke, often praised Best for being a mentor to her. Denver Pyle, who played wise Uncle Jesse, was another seasoned actor who shared Best's old-school values about hard work and respect. On set, there was plenty of laughter and fun, but everyone understood that James Best expected a certain level of professionalism from everyone around him. Unfortunately, not everyone on the cast met that standard. As the Dukes of Hazzard became more and more popular, tension started to build behind the scenes. Fame was changing people. Egos were getting bigger. And for a man like James Best, who had spent decades perfecting his craft, there was one co-star whose behavior he simply could not tolerate anymore. When you think about the Dukes of Hazzard, you probably picture bright sunshine, roaring car engines, and the mischievous Duke boys jumping over creeks in the General Lee. The show looked like one big happy family, having the time of their lives. But behind that polished image, there was an undercurrent of tension that ran deeper than any pothole on a Georgia back road. From the very beginning, the Dukes of Hazzard was a massive hit. Ratings went through the roof. Toy stores couldn't keep General Lee cars on the shelves. Fans everywhere wanted more episodes, more action, and more of those lovable characters. But for James Best, all that sudden fame didn't come with blind excitement. He was an old-school actor from a different era, a time when actors took their work seriously and treated every scene like it mattered. Best's working style was disciplined and focused. He studied his scripts carefully, memorized every line, and rehearsed his movements until they were perfect. This serious approach sometimes clashed with other cast members, especially some of the younger actors who started treating filming like it was just a big party or photo shoot. The production schedule for the Dukes of Hazzard moved incredibly fast. Lines were often changed at the last minute. Scenes got rescheduled without much notice. There was constant pressure to deliver more car chases, more explosions, and more laughs. To many people on the show, this fast pace was thrilling and exciting. But to James Best, it sometimes felt careless, like they were sacrificing good storytelling just to create more spectacle. Best started noticing problems that really bothered him. Some cast members would miss their cues during filming. Rehearsals would be half-hearted or skipped entirely. Some actors would improvise their lines without thinking about how it affected the other performers in the scene. One day, Bess would show up ready to film, only to discover that they had completely skipped the blocking rehearsal where actors learn their positions and movements. Another time, cameras would start rolling while one of his co-stars was still trying to memorize their lines, leaving the entire crew scrambling to keep up. It wasn't exactly laziness, but it was a completely different approach to acting than what James Best was used to. He had been trained to be prepared, professional, and respectful of everyone else's time. This relaxed attitude toward the work grated against everything Best believed in as an actor. What made things even worse was that some cast members seemed to actually enjoy the chaos. They thought showing up late was just part of being a television star. Some even seemed to believe that their star power meant they didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. This attitude was like poison to James Best, who had always believed that being a professional meant being reliable and prepared. Best never openly criticized anyone or started shouting on set. That wasn't his style. Instead, he would get strangely quiet and distant. You could see in his face a raised eyebrow here, a tense silence there. Behind his eyes, you could tell there was a storm brewing. He felt like the show's quality and integrity were slipping away, and it was breaking his heart. The cast and crew definitely noticed a change in James Best. Some people worried about him. Others just shrugged it off as the stress of a busy filming schedule. But nobody could ignore the fact that something was bothering him deeply. While the public saw funny one-liners and exciting car chases, the behind-the-scenes world was sometimes tense and uncomfortable. James Best had no intention of causing drama or making waves. He simply refused to let distractions interfere with his work. He stayed respectful and punctual, and he remained fiercely protective of his craft. But in the shadows behind the cameras, tensions were building. Like storm clouds, friendships were feeling the strain. Jokes started to feel sharper and more cutting. And there was one person who became the main focus of Best's growing frustration. This wasn't just a personality clash between two different people. It was a crack in what had been marketed to the public as a perfect, family-friendly show where everyone got along like real relatives. Every television series changes over time as it grows and evolves. But few shows change as dramatically as the Dukes of Hazzard did when the laughter on screen began to hide the tension behind the cameras. By the time the Dukes of Hazzard reached its fourth season, the lines between the actors' on-screen personalities and their real-life behavior were starting to blur in troubling ways. The charm and good humor that had once defined life on the set were wearing thin for James Best. Beneath the surface of all the country comedy and exciting car chases, something deeply personal was festering and growing worse. It wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. Instead, it was a slow, creeping problem that ate away at the foundation of trust and respect. And one day, all of that built-up frustration finally boiled over into something that nobody saw coming. James Best had put up with a lot of problems over the years. He was known throughout Hollywood for his discipline and infinite patience with difficult situations and people. But even the most patient person has limits, and Best was rapidly approaching his. While he was always careful never to criticize his fellow cast members in public, the people who worked on the set every day could see that something had fundamentally changed in the way he carried himself around certain people. The frustration that Best had once been able to brush off and ignore was now sitting just beneath the surface of his professional demeanor. You could see it in his posture, in his facial expressions, and even in the way he delivered lines that had once brought him so much joy and satisfaction. The spark that had made Roscoe such a lovable character was starting to dim because Best was struggling with personal disappointment. Everything came to a breaking point during what should have been just another routine day of filming. The cast was working on a scene that required careful coordination and precise timing between multiple actors. It was the kind of scene that James Best had prepared for in his usual meticulous way. He had memorized every line perfectly, rehearsed all of his physical movements, and practiced his timing until it was flawless. But one of his co-stars showed up late to the set that day. Not just a few minutes late, which would have been understandable, but seriously late and completely unprepared when they finally arrived. They hadn't memorized their lines. They didn't bring the right energy or focus to the scene. And worst of all, They didn't even bother to apologize for holding up the entire production. According to people who were there that day, James Best's face reportedly froze in complete disbelief. At first, he tried to handle the situation professionally and diplomatically. He pulled his co-star aside for what he hoped would be a quiet, private conversation away from the rest of the cast and crew. But the conversation didn't stay quiet for very long. One crew member who witnessed the confrontation said that the tone changed very quickly from polite to something much more serious. Voices didn't turn into yelling, but they became cutting and cold. The words being exchanged were pointed and personal. It became a real confrontation, plain and simple, between two people who had very different ideas about what it meant to be a professional actor. While the exact words that were said were never published in any magazine or newspaper, the people who were present that day said the disagreement became deeply personal very quickly. James Best, who had dedicated his entire life to the craft of acting, felt like his professionalism and everything he stood for was being mocked and dismissed. What might have seemed like harmless joking or casual behavior to one person felt like a direct insult to everything that Best held sacred about his work. For Best, this confrontation wasn't just about memorizing lines or showing up on time. It was about something much deeper and more fundamental: respect. Respect for the work, respect for the other actors, respect for the crew who were working hard to make the show successful, and respect for fans who tuned in every week expecting quality entertainment. That day, James Best did something that shocked absolutely everyone on the set. He put down his script, said nothing to anyone, and simply walked away. He didn't storm off in anger or make a dramatic scene. He didn't yell or threaten anyone. He just quietly left the set, and his silence spoke louder than any angry words could have. Production stopped immediately. The air was thick with shock and confusion. Nobody knew what to do or say. This wasn't a publicity stunt or an empty threat. This was a man of principle drawing a clear boundary and doing it with a finality that shook everyone who witnessed it. The show's producers tried desperately to smooth things over behind closed doors. Phone calls were made to agents and managers. Emergency meetings were held to figure out how to fix the situation. But James Best was absolutely resolute in his decision. He would return to finish his contract and complete the show, but not under the same conditions as before, and certainly not if it meant working directly with a co-star who had crossed his line. The show had to adapt to this new reality. Scenes were completely rewritten to avoid putting Best and his co-star together. Filming schedules were rearranged to keep them apart. While the fans watching at home never noticed any difference, everyone working on the show definitely did. From that moment forward, there were unspoken rules in place that created a completely new normal on the set. James Best had made his decision, and he was going to stick to it no matter what. He would honor his commitment to finish what he had started, but he would never again work directly beside the person who had crossed a line he had drawn in the sand. For fans who absolutely adored the Dukes of Hazzard, the idea that there could be any serious tension among the beloved cast felt almost impossible to believe. The entire show was built on the illusion of unity and family bonds. On screen, all the characters teased each other, got into little squabbles, and laughed their way through every adventure. Sheriff Roscoe might have been a bumbling fool who couldn't catch the Duke boys to save his life, but he did it all with such a lovable twinkle in his eye that you couldn't help but root for him. Bo, Luke, Daisy, Uncle Jesse, and even Boss Hogg all felt like pieces of the same down-home puzzle that fit together perfectly. So when rumors quietly began circulating in the early 2000s that James Best had once refused to work with a co-star ever again, fans were absolutely stunned and completely confused. Who could possibly have drawn such a hard, unforgiving line from someone who seemed so genuinely kind and beloved by everyone? Naturally, speculation and gossip took hold of the fan community like wildfire. Some people pointed fingers at the Duke boys themselves, Tom Wopat and John Schneider. Both actors had famously feuded with the show's producers over money and creative control of their characters. Their temporary departure during the 5th season had sparked newspaper headlines and forced the producers to bring in replacement actors. Tom Wopat, in particular, was known for having a rebellious streak and was rumored to be difficult to work with at times. John Schneider, though younger and generally more easygoing, was still learning how to handle fame and might have stepped on some toes along the way. Then there was Ben Jones, the actor who played the lovable mechanic Cooter Davenport. Jones had his own well-documented battles with the show's production team and actually walked away from the Dukes of Hazzard for part of the second season. His strong political opinions and outsider status made him another likely suspect in the fan theories about who might have clashed with James Best. Other fans speculated that the problem might have been with Catherine Bach, the stunning actress who played Daisy Duke. She and Best rarely shared scenes together, but some people wonder whether some kind of behind-the-scenes drama had erupted during press tours, interviews, or script read-throughs. However, people who were close to production quickly dismissed that theory entirely. Bach and Best had always maintained a friendly, professional relationship. She had even publicly called him a true professional and said he was a joy to work with. Still, other fans pointed their suspicions at Sorrel Bouc, the classically trained actor who played the corrupt boss hog. But this theory also fell apart quickly because Bouc was known throughout Hollywood as a consummate professional who took his craft very seriously, just like James Best did. The most surprising theory of all centered around Sonny Schroyer, the actor who played the gentle, soft-spoken Deputy Enos Strait. This seemed absolutely absurd to most fans because Roscoe and Enos were almost always paired together in scenes. They had what appeared to be genuine chemistry and real friendship. Their scenes were filled with hilarious comedic banter, and their bond seemed completely authentic and natural. Schroyer often referred to James Best as his mentor and teacher. At fan conventions and in magazine interviews, they always smiled for the cameras and shared what seemed like fond, happy memories of their time working together. But here's where the mystery started to deepen in ways that made longtime fans very uncomfortable. Behind those smiles and public appearances, something was definitely missing. In rare, unguarded moments, sharp-eyed fans caught glimpses of stiffness and distance between Best and Schroyer. There were no heated arguments or dramatic confrontations on stage at conventions. Instead, there was just silence, controlled, polite, and very deliberate silence that spoke volumes. For years and years, no one knew what to make of these subtle signs. As time passed and more cast members began opening up in interviews and behind-the-scenes documentaries, small cracks began forming the official story that everything had always been perfect on the set. A few crew members started hinting at unspoken issues between Best and one particular cast member, though they were careful never to name names. A subtle pattern began to emerge when fans went back and rewatched old episodes with fresh eyes. Best and Schroyer's scenes together became noticeably brief in later seasons. They rarely had emotionally connected moments. Sometimes their conversations seemed like they had been stitched together from completely separate takes, where the actors weren't even in the same room. Still, the complete answer remained frustratingly elusive. It would take several more years, many more interviews, and a whole lot of persistent detective work by dedicated fans before the truth finally, quietly emerged. And when it did, it wasn't dramatic or scandalous. Instead, it was simple, painful, and perhaps the most human part of this entire Southern television legend. When the name finally came to light, it caught most fans completely off guard. Not because this person had a reputation for being a troublemaker, not because they were known for stirring up drama, but precisely because they seemed so harmless and even beloved by other cast members. The co-star that James Best had quietly but firmly vowed never to work with again was indeed Sonny Schroyer, the actor who played the bumbling but lovable Deputy Enos Strait. To most devoted fans of the show, this revelation made absolutely no sense at first. After all, Roscoe and Enos were the show's most iconic law enforcement duo. Their scenes together were filled with perfect slapstick humor, hilarious call and response jokes, and a brotherly rapport that viewers had grown to absolutely adore over 7 seasons. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far more complicated and painful than anyone could have imagined. Accounts from crew members and people close to production began to fill in the missing pieces of this sad puzzle. It wasn't one single incident that broke their relationship. It wasn't one terrible insult or one unforgivable moment. Instead, it was a slow unraveling of trust and respect, an accumulation of dozens of small moments that eventually built up to something that James Best simply could not ignore or forgive anymore. According to multiple sources who worked on the show, the root of the problem was respect, or in James Best's eyes, Sonny Schroyer's complete lack of it. At a time when Best was pouring his heart and soul into his role as Roscoe, constantly reworking dialogue to make it funnier, refining his physical comedy to make it more entertaining, and staying late after filming to perfect his timing, Schroyer began showing troubling signs of disengagement and indifference. Schroyer started arriving late to the set on a regular basis. He would show up unprepared, not having studied his lines or thought about his character's motivations. He had a tendency to joke around and act silly during serious rehearsals, which Best felt completely undercut the tone and professionalism that the scene required. While other actors were trying to focus and do their best work, Schroyer seemed more interested in goofing off and getting laughs from the crew. The breaking point came during one now legendary moment while they were filming a particularly important scene. James Best had spent considerable time and effort reworking the dialogue and choreographing the physical comedy to make the scene as funny and entertaining as possible. He had rehearsed every movement, practiced every line reading, and perfected every comedic beat. But when it came time to film, Schroyer was completely unprepared and seemed almost proud of it. According to people who were there that day, Schroyer made what was reportedly a mocking, dismissive comment about Best's dedication to getting the scene right. He essentially made fun of Best for caring so much about a silly comedy scene that had already gone through multiple rewrites. James Best didn't respond with anger or start yelling. That would have been completely out of character for such a professional, dignified man. But according to everyone who was nearby, his entire face changed in that moment. The smile dropped completely. The friendly conversation ended immediately. Something deep inside him quietly but permanently shut down. To other people on the set, it might have seemed like just a minor disagreement between two actors who had different approaches to their work. But for James Best, Schroyer's comment wasn't just careless or thoughtless. It felt like a direct attack on everything Best had worked for his entire career, everything he stood for as a serious actor who happened to be working in comedy. For a man who had been raised in the old Hollywood system that valued discipline, preparation, and respect above all else, that moment marked an absolute breaking point that could never be repaired. In private conversations with producers and directors, Best made it crystal clear that he would no longer share scenes directly with Sonny Schroyer under any circumstances. From that moment forward, the show's directors and writers were quietly instructed to work around this new reality. Scripts had to be rewritten. Scenes had to be restructured. Filming schedules had to be completely rearranged. Most fans never noticed the subtle distance that began to grow between Roscoe and Enos on screen, but if you knew what to look for, it was definitely there. In the production notes, in the script revisions, and in the blocking directions that told actors where to stand and how to move. The separation was obvious and deliberate. It was a quiet, professional, but absolutely permanent change that affected every single episode that came after. Years later, even after the Dukes of Hazzard had ended its run and reunion specials brought most of the cast back together, the rift between Best and Schroyer remained as strong as ever. At fan conventions and public appearances, the two men appeared on the same stages and participated in the same panel discussions, but they rarely interacted directly with each other. In interviews and public statements, Sonny Schroyer continued to speak respectfully of James Best, often calling him a mentor and praising his professionalism. James Best, for his part, chose never to name names or discuss the situation publicly. He carried the burden of their broken relationship quietly and privately, honoring a principle of dignity and discretion that few people ever saw or understood. This was not a feud built on screaming matches, public scandals, or tabloid headlines. It was something much quieter than that, and in many ways much sadder. It was a professional relationship and personal bond that had been broken by a fundamental misalignment of values, by clashing approaches to craft of acting, and by a deep disappointment that could never be repaired or forgiven. When the truth finally came to light through careful investigation by dedicated fans and entertainment journalists, it didn't feel like juicy gossip or scandalous celebrity drama. Instead, it felt like a rare, honest window into the heart of a man who had given everything to his craft and had simply asked for the same level of commitment and respect in return. When James Best passed away in 2015 at the age of 88, heartfelt tributes poured in from all around the world. Fans remembered him not just as a lovable, bumbling Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane, but as a talented teacher, accomplished painter, devoted father, and loyal friend to countless people in the entertainment industry. Co-stars, former students, and admirers from every corner of Hollywood all describe him in exactly the same way: generous with his time and knowledge, incredibly talented, fiercely professional in everything he did, and absolutely unforgettable as both an actor and a human being. To this day, The Dukes of Hazzard remains one of television's most iconic and beloved series, and Sheriff Roscoe remains one of the medium's most enduring and quotable characters. But James Best's true legacy reaches far beyond the patrol car crashes and silly catchphrases that made him famous. He was a man who valued respect, discipline, and genuine artistry in an industry that too often forgets the importance of these qualities. Best brought real gravitas and depth to what could have been just a throwaway, one-note comedic role. He crafted a character that has lived on in the hearts and memories of multiple generations of fans. The behind-the-scenes feud that quietly shadowed his time on the show was never the main focus of his remarkable story, but it was definitely a significant part of it. And perhaps understanding this difficult chapter makes his overall legacy feel even more human and relatable. Throughout his entire career, James Best was never interested in airing personal grievances in public. He never sought revenge against people who had disappointed him, and he never used his fame to settle scores or embarrass his former colleagues. He simply drew a clear boundary based on his principles, held that line with quiet but unshakable conviction, and let his professional work speak for itself. For longtime fans of the Dukes of Hazzard, learning the complete truth behind this rift adds fascinating new layers to their understanding and appreciation of the show. It reminds all of us that even in a fictional world built on fantasy, nostalgia, and good old-fashioned family entertainment, real human emotions and conflicts live behind the cameras. Sometimes the people who make us laugh the most and bring us the greatest joy are also carrying the heaviest emotional burdens that we never see. In the end, the story of James Best is not a story of bitterness, resentment, or Hollywood drama. Instead, it's a powerful story of dignity, principle, and unwavering commitment to excellence. His ability to entertain audiences never wavered, even during his most difficult personal and professional challenges. His impact both on screen and off continues to ripple through the world of acting and far beyond the entertainment industry. And the truth that he carried with him so quietly and respectfully for so many years remains a powerful lesson for all of us about the importance of standing firm for what matters most, even when it's difficult, and even when no one else understands why it's so important to you. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button to let me know. Share this video with other Dukes of Hazzard fans who might not know the real story behind one of television's most beloved shows. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from your favorite classic TV shows. There are so many more secrets waiting to be discovered, and I can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, keep those memories alive, and remember that sometimes the most interesting stories happen when the cameras stop rolling.